It is exactly 12:30 on this Wednesday. Very warm welcome on behalf of the European Liberal Forum to another episode of the web series On the Agenda. Today we're talking about a liberal vision for the Porto Social Summit. If you don't know what the European Liberal Forum is and what it does, shame on you. But if you don't know it in reality, let me just tell you one or two words what we do. We are the political think tank and foundation of the European Liberals, the ALDE party. And as you also can see from the presence of one Dragos Pislaro, we are connected to the Renew Europe group in the European Parliament. We try to find liberal solutions, liberal answers to European questions. And one of these questions is indeed how to go about with the social sphere in Europe. The pandemic and the economic fallout and the prolonged restrictions have clearly changed the socio-economic landscape across Europe, and millions of citizens have been affected. At the same time, we are looking at massive transformations apart from the pandemic, being it towards a more sustainable environment, more sustainable economy, but also the workplace is changing through more digitalization. We know that the jobs that we have today might not be there tomorrow. The natural cause and effect, I have a kid and the kid will have the same job as I have, just as I had the job of my father or my mother before, this doesn't work anymore. So we see Schumpeter's creative destruction on speed, also when it comes to jobs, job creation. But this also means that we have to learn differently, that our social systems need to work differently. And now with the Portuguese presidency and the hosting of the EU Social Summit in Porto, 7th to 8th of May, these things are on the agenda. How can the European welfare systems respond to all those changes that are going on in an ever more complex environment, especially when it comes to the economy? And while a lot of people see social issues, social rights more and more as human rights, we have young people, old people, mostly from the left, claiming that there are rights, the second generation rights. Liberals must react. Liberals must own the topic of social issues. Liberals must own the topic that are around the Porto Social Summit. So to avoid that the left dreams become a nightmarish reality. And one person to show us how to own us is my dear old friend Dragos Pislaro, who is with us together with my friend Giorgio. But enough from me. I have the big pleasure to hand over to my fantastic colleague, Maria, from our Policy and Research Unit, who will take over today's moderation for this, I bet, very interesting discussion.
Thank you, Daniel. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining. And thank you, Daniel, again, for a very inspiring introductory speech. I think it set the great tone for the discussion, which I'm very much looking forward. I hope you do too. Today we have two distinguished speakers with us, which I will present in a second. And I would like to add a couple of words to what Daniel has said about the topic of today's webinar. It's indeed the driver for it is the upcoming social summit in Porto, which will take place in early May. And the idea today is to discuss what is the liberal perspective on all the topics which are currently on the agenda, or we assume have to be put on the agenda, and to see how the challenges which are currently, which Europe is currently facing, in particular the double green and digital transition, coupled with the unprecedented health and economic crisis, how can we transform these challenges into opportunities, into a window of opportunity to address the issues which probably have been ignored before or which currently become outdated. So I think with the interventions from our speakers, we will have a very interesting discussion to see how these questions might be addressed. before the summit and on the summit and in the years after that. So first, and before I present, I give the floor to the speakers, I would like to mention two internal rules for this webinar for the participants. First of all, it's important to say that this event is being recorded. It will be later put on the website and the YouTube channel of the European Liberal Forum. And another thing to all the participants, to all the attendees, please keep in mind that the Q&A box is open from now on. So please feel free to address your questions, to ask any questions which you might have during the discussion, and we'll try to address them in the second part of our webinar. And without another thing which I need to say, unfortunately, one of our three speakers was not able to join today. Dr. Afke Grön, due to unforeseen circumstances, unfortunately had to cancel her participation. Nevertheless, I think we have a very interesting combination of two other speakers. And yeah, without any further ado, I introduce Mr. Dragoș Pislaru, the Romanian member of the European Parliament from the Renew Europe group and very active member of the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs. And Dragoș, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria. I would like to salute Daniel and thank him for the intro speech. Thanks for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to share my thoughts with fellow liberals whenever I have the chance. And of course, the second part is even more important for me to hear your thoughts, to hear the viewers' thoughts on the most pressing issues of today. Today, basically, we are not living business as usual. The lockdown and the curfews have become the most used words, and they have inevitably shaped every aspect of our existence. I mean, for us liberals, our individual liberties have been diminished, in terms of free movement, in terms of what to wear, how to protect, and our activity has been reduced in terms of economic or social activities. And here we are today, all of us patiently waiting for vaccination and to be sure that this pandemic will actually be behind us. But what happened actually these days in the last year or so is that the pandemic has actually exposed our vulnerabilities at the European level. Our insufficient work on building convergence of actually being there and having the understanding what is happening at grassroots level in real life in many of the corners of this particular continent. It's actually at the same time a year where we see a lot of things not working, but at the same time, it's a year where we see a lot of community work or a lot of solidarity. And we've seen examples of young people taking care of elderly. We've seen volunteering. We've seen individual initiatives, civil society initiatives, corporate initiatives that were going hand in hand with what the public sector was delivering. And we've seen how important the private initiatives were for actually giving us hope and getting us through the crisis. And that's actually a very good, a way to start our discussion, because the discussion is first and foremost related to the deep belief that we share in the individual capacities of each person and his or her potential to thrive, prosper, and contribute to the society in a meaningful and unique way. And that's actually a principle applicable to every European citizen, but it's especially relevant when it comes to the most vulnerable groups, such as persons with disabilities, people from minorities, people living in poverty and social exclusion. So what we would like to see as liberals is that these people are not kept captive of any kind of welfare system, but they have access and opportunity to get out and live their life in the most vibrant way possible. And the situation right now is that we have quite a bunch of people that are actually failing to do so. And obviously, the question is, what was the failure? Where do we have a problem in terms of this access or opportunity that I was referring to? And and here, I mean, usually when we talk about social policies, describing policies in the realm of the day-to-day life of our citizens, of people throughout the EU, we are actually confronted with a particular mistake, saying that social policies are left policies. I mean, there are policies that are supposed to be at the center of what the left of the political spectrum is delivering. And I think that this is the first mistake that needs to be corrected. Social policies are not left or right. Social policies are about the life of the city, life of our cities, the life of our communities. Um, and what we need to agree is that citizens constitute the essence of the union, and we need to do what is best to address their needs, be that short term, things that they want, or longer term investments to correct the situation. And I would say that regardless of one's political affiliation, the social agenda, the things that are happening day to day, should actually represent a priority. Vulnerable people, have-nots, people in fear of deprivation, alienated from the rest of the society, should actually be at the center of our attention, because otherwise their insecurity and uncertainties would be exploited by politicians who will threaten our democratic values, by populists with harmful messages from extreme left to extreme right. So what we are actually facing right now is that if we are not going to be concerned about the social agenda, we might be witnessing this kind of attack from both the extreme left and extreme right on us, and we will be squeezed, basically, the ones that we are trying to preserve democratic values, from the left to the right of the political spectrum. So for us as liberals, I mean, this is the first main argument in the discussion, advancing the social agenda is actually a matter of preserving democracy and countering the illiberal populist discourses that create turmoil and mistrust in our institutions. And we are relying, from John Locke onwards, we are relying on institutions, we are relying on the fact that we need to preserve individual liberty. And we are under threat right now by this wave of illiberal governments. And it's actually tricky because the link would be that the more people will live in uncertainty and insecurity, the bigger is the chance to have more and more support for illiberal action. So that's actually the thing. Now, if we made this connection that we as liberals should be concerned about leaving people behind and on who is going to be left behind, then the bottom question is, how do we deliver that? And indeed, there's a difference in terms of instruments and vision from in between us and the ones that are from a doctrinary standpoint at the left. And why is this important? Because there are two important strands when it comes to children and youth or vulnerable categories and so on. So one strand is the rights strand. I mean, coming from the human rights part. I mean, what used to be moral grounds and moral principle during the history of human thought has actually been codified in legislation. So we are right now having these human rights. And indeed, Daniel has actually mentioned second, third generation rights, entitlements that are actually put forward. And indeed, this is one important strand that we should recognize up to a particular level, when it comes to the rights of children not to be trafficked, or, the rights of women not to be exposed to domestic violence, or anti-bullying, and so on and so forth. So that's one strand. But what we are adding right now, and we should add as liberals, is that we are also believers of the fact that investment in people is important. Investment in children, for instance, with prevention, avoiding school dropouts, prevention in health, ensuring proper nutrition and housing and so on. That's actually that can actually be perceived from an investment perspective in their future, having two immediate benefits. One is diminishing the opportunity cost, diminishing the opportunity cost in the sense that the bill on our society in terms of further health bill or unemployment and so on will be reduced. And on the other hand, the better these children, young people, vulnerable people are going to be integrated in our society. They will contribute, they will pay taxes, they will actually be contributing to the benefit of the society. So if we are actually going to balance the rights agenda with the investment agenda, we are coming actually to the liberal view. And I will just briefly point out that, and I will conclude. If you want to say, Maria, please.
Yes, Dragos, you have mentioned so many interesting points already. I think it makes sense to keep them for discussion after, because it's yeah. But if you want to finish on the briefly outline them, and then we'll come back to them later.
Absolutely. So that's what I'm going to do. So we have the Porto summit right now, and we have quite a few things on the agenda with the action plan for the European pillar of social rights. And we have the child guarantee and the child rights strategy. So we have quite a number of non-legislative documents, but that are creating actually a framework for implementing social policy. But what we would actually need to put at priority, we should actually have at least three main things that are quite important. So from the political debate standpoint, this is a moment in which we need to agree that all the democratic forces should stay together in order to be sure that we are actively engaging the citizens, that we are, more or less showing that we care about what is happening in terms of, the vulnerabilities that we have in our society. From a resource debate, we need to put forward the fact that we have right now resources from the RRF, from the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the cohesion policy, the MFF as a whole, the multi-annual financial framework. So that's another thing that we should actually say, we should use these resources for addressing the issues. And then we have the efficiency and the coordination debate, which is kind of important. And we as liberals, we are asking for the fact that having resources is not enough. We should address the lack of cooperation in between authorities, the silo policy, the fact that we need a partnership and coordination at a completely different level. And this would actually mean bringing the private sector on board, bringing social entrepreneurship, using innovation, and redesigning the social contract in the sense that it's not just about a state and a welfare system, it's about the society as a whole that needs to contribute, so that investing in providing access and opportunity for the vulnerable people will be highlight. And again, the private sector has the capacity, the knowledge, the know-how. And if we agree that we have a return in a society for these kind of investments, then it's just normal for the private sector and the civil society to be on board on equal footing with the state. So that's actually something that we should actually put on top of the regular agenda for the Porto Summit with our signature on it.
Thank you a lot, Dragos. It's indeed a lot of insightful remarks already, which set the landscape for the discussion from a political point of view, from perspective what liberals are trying, from the equilibrium which liberals are trying to achieve between their priorities. And I think the next speaker will complement this perspective with a more technical view on the story, which I think is a great balance again. And I'm happy to present Mr. Giorgio Vernoni from Einaudi Center from Italy, who is specifically focuses on labor economy, and I think he will. He'll be glad to share his perspective on the challenges with the current crisis is presenting us with, and what might be our priorities for the future. Giorgio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this another interesting event of the European Liberal Forum. What I can do for you today maybe is to share some of the topics and the idea that we have discussed in the working group that has prepared the position paper of the forum for the Porto summit. And in fact, the starting point of our discussion was the unprecedented impact of the pandemic crisis. But it is unprecedented not only for, we'd say, the intensity, but also for the quality, some qualitative characteristics of this impact. The first one that I want to remember is that we are in front of a crisis of both supply and demand. So people cannot buy what they want, the way they want, but at the same time, businesses cannot offer their products. Think of what's happening in this moment in the electronic sector, where the production of components for the automotive industry or for consumer electronics is in fact making difficult for businesses to produce what the market needs. The second characteristic is that we are in front of what we can name an asynchronous crisis that breaks the international value chains. So when you have the peak of the pandemic in one country, you have a release in another country, and then that is making the international trade very deep. The third characteristic is that we are in front of an uneven crisis because it affects some specific sectors in consequence of the containment measures. The consequence of this third point is very important, but because you have differentiated impact at the regional level. So on the basis of the productive characteristics of a region, you have differentiated impact at the local level. But what we are observing in this moment is that the labor market is not reacting proportionally to the intensity of the shock. Why this? Because the European short-term strategy to tackle the crisis has been, we can say, to sterilize its impact through the extensive use of subsidies for both people and businesses. The idea, we could say, the bet actually, is that at the basis of this strategy is to preserve the production base until the end of the emergency. To explain what I'm trying to say, I want to share with you some data about the variation of employment and unemployment in Europe. Can you see it? Yes. This is some data from the report on global economy in Italy. That is the flagship report of the Centro Einaudi and is about to be published in May. And you can see the change in employment and unemployment in the first 3 quarters of 2020, so before the crisis and then during the first phase of the pandemic crisis in the Euro area, in the United States, and in Italy. And what you can observe very, very quickly is that actually the impact in Europe was in the first phase was quite modest. And look at the difference with the United States, when actually the labor market has been left free to float and to adapt. So you have in the first quarter, the United States, in the second quarter lost about 13% of employment and experienced a rise in unemployment of 230%. And the reaction in Italy was in Italy and in Europe in general was different because of that strategy that I was talking about a few moments ago. Let's go back to the sorry, but I cannot. Okay. Can you see me now? Yes. And this situation poses, from a leader standpoint, some problems. And we could say that the strategy that Europe has adopted is to sort of suspend the logic of free adaptation of labor market. But there is a hidden price from this strategy, and this is what we can name the risk of deactivation of labor supply and labor demand. So this is the risk that we are facing in this moment. That in fact the people that are not registered as an employee that are moving into the inactivity area. And the same thing could happen also from the supply side, where many businesses and companies that are receiving subsidies could be, we would say, demotivated in their business activity. This overall situation poses two challenges from a liberal standpoint. The first one is to acknowledge the depth of the crisis and the social impact, and that probably the standard policy tool set of liberals that are in particular labor active policies, we could talk about reskilling and upskilling, won't be enough in some regions of the continent to contain the risk of social unrest. So this is the first challenge for liberals. The second is to find a practical solution to control the risk of long-term deactivation of the labor supply. This is why in the working group, we discussed the importance of conditionality as a tool to contain the risk of uncontrolled deactivation. Speaking for the general public, and conditionality is a principle that impose on people that are receiving some different form of subsidies to make something to deserve them, so to study, to look for a job. And this principle has been at the basis of the labor policies of Europe in the last 20 years. And in fact, it was hugely used during the previous global financial crisis. And so in the document, we stress the importance to restate in the strategy of containment of the social consequences of the pandemic crisis, to restate the relevance of conditionality as a key principle from a liberal standpoint. So these are, in my opinion, the two main challenges that we have to face. On one side, being realistic about the real impact of the crisis. And so having what we can name a vision of free market for the grown-ups that actually understand that not everywhere free market can work properly, is working properly, that we will have uneven consequences at the local level. And at the same time, remember, through the principle of conditionality, also the principle of individual responsibility in face of the help that people will receive from European and national institution in the next months. So maybe I would stop here, and maybe we could discuss more thoroughly this topic later. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Giorgio. Yes, I have said, I think it's a very nice complement to very complementary speeches from a political perspective, from more expert-based technical perspective. And what I've noticed, the red thread for both speeches, for both perspectives, is basically a focus on mismatches, multiple mismatches, which we're currently facing, the social policies across Europe are facing. And one of them, I think, is the one between the intensity of the current crisis and the long-term consequences of the crisis, but also of the dual transition. And the challenge for Europe is now to combine the two potential contradictory challenges, potential contradictory problems, because short-term urgent situations might require urgent solutions, short-term solutions. Also, the long-term transformation, which is said by the ongoing transformations, are required from us investment into long-term future. And I would like to ask you, what is your perspective? What are your ideas in this regard? And I give the floor to both of you, one after another. And Dragos, if you would like to start.
Yeah, so I would like to salute Giorgio. I really appreciate his very well documented presentation, and indeed was complementary to complementing actually the views that I've actually been expressing. Just a few more words from my side on this global image. So the whole point right now is to decide ourselves as liberal what are our priorities, and obviously our main priorities are, I mean, starting from individual liberties and having the economy working and so on and so forth. But I would say that right now with the Porto Summit agenda, there is actually time to focus on three things that are actually really important.
Sono le ore 13.
One important thing is we need to have, if especially for us at Renew Europe, I mean, it's no brainer to say that we need to have the next generation as our ally in promoting the kind of Europe that we believe that it's suitable for the future. That means investing in children and youth as a priority and avoiding to have this kind of lockdown generation and fueling more the radicalization of the population in Europe. That's something that we should address. And I think it's really fitted for us to put that particular perspective of investment in children and youth, because once we agree that we are not talking about social expenditure, but about social investment, then we are opening the door for the private sector and the civil society to contribute. And here is the next point. I really honestly believe that entrepreneurship is actually a way to solve a lot of the vulnerabilities that we are having, and social entrepreneurship and social impact investment and mobilizing resources with the social outcome. And that's something that should not be the monopoly of just the public sector. And that's actually what I was saying at the beginning, but just to be more concrete about that, I do believe that private entrepreneurs should actually be involved in solving the big social challenges that we are having. For instance, one of the challenges that we are facing is that we are pushing for digital, and that's something very dear to us liberals. But when we are pushing for the transformation of our society and becoming more digital, we have the digital divide component. That means that if we are going to have a good chunk of the population without the skills, the digital skills, then they will be more or less marginalized in our society. So that means that investing in our society is actually means that we should actually provide from the private sector as well the digital skills that are necessary in order to have them on board. And the third point, and the last one, is related to something that is really important, and that is, how do we use innovation and technology to get on board the vulnerable categories and to diminish social inclusion. And here we have we have these important things such as assistive technologies for disabled people that will allow them to get integrated. So instead of paying benefits or paying some amounts of money to keep them afloat, we can invest in them joining the rest of the society and integrating them through assistive technologies, using AI, using technology to get people integrated through skills and jobs, and through social investment is the way forward. So I just wanted to make the link in between what I was mentioning, more like a political intro, with what Giorgio has actually mentioned in terms of the fact that the standard active labor market policy would not actually be enough. And it's the moment for us to react and rewrite basically the way in which we get involved as liberals in social policy. So that's I hope an answer in between the short-term and long-term perspective, Maria, that you address.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's indeed a very, very insightful perspective on this question. And if Giorgio would like to present it from his point of view. Please.
Well, I agree with you that you are discussing the topic only from a social point of view. The other side is development and entrepreneurship. That's the other side of the discussion that we have to tackle. From this point of view, probably, if I may say, say from a European, for the European strategy, it could be very interesting to try to work together on development and social policy. That practically speaking means make the structural funds more integrated between them, because probably in the next few years, this will be the only strategy to have some form of socially sustainable development at the regional level. So probably Europe will have to consider more integrated policies between the social side and the development side. So that means practically make the structural funds more integrated, probably in a mandatory way more integrated when the regions and the nations have to build their schemes. So this could be an idea for the future and from the policy making at the European level. Another topic is the relationship between different generations. I would like to come back to the risk of deactivation and stress that this risk is higher in the younger generation that have been already overwhelmed by the previous crisis of global financial crisis in 2008 and now have to face a second dramatic pandemic crisis. So this is changing the way that young people consider and live work as a part of their lives. Work is losing importance in the younger generations, and then we come back to the risk of deactivation in the previous future that could also jeopardize the opportunity of development, because if we won't have the push from younger generation in the next 20 years, probably it will be more difficult for Europe, and not only for Europe, but also for most of the developed countries to have not only the ability to make the economy grow again, but also the ability to make the economy change in the directions that we are everybody discussing about, in particular in terms of digital transformation and above all in terms of sustainability, ecological sustainability. So this is a second topic. We go back to the topic of deactivation. So the importance to find realistic and effective tools to tackle the current crisis, and not, I would say, more a rhetorical or idealistic way, a real practical way to tackle the current crisis.
Yeah, thank you a lot. And also, I think that indeed, like the combination between the short-term and long-term strategy, they inevitably put a question in front of us. What is the correlation between individual responsibility for employment and solidarity, to show solidarity between the groups of people who might currently, particularly vulnerable people, but also many other groups who just found themselves in precarious situations due to the unforeseen circumstances, unprecedented crisis. So this raises the question of conditionality, which Giorgio has explicitly mentioned in his introductory topic, but also it is closely linked to the question of creating opportunities for conditionality, providing the and indeed what Giorgio has mentioned, the correlation between principles and reality. Although we believe that all citizens have to have the opportunity to develop their skills and to contribute to the economy. At the same time, we have to realize that activizing labor force in times when the market is not fully active also might present it with a challenge of providing necessary support. Although that's exactly where we come to the question of conditionality. What are the conditions? What are the terms, and what are the how long this support should be provided? Also with the keeping in mind the long-term perspective, how receiving support from the state or from Europe has to be directed towards developing skills for the future, and how it is also should be supported by creating necessary opportunities through easing in businesses, through providing support to small and medium enterprises, but also by investing in social economy, as Dragos has mentioned. So all these are the questions which come together, and we shouldn't neglect the complexity of this question when we talk about providing support, but also trying to activate labor force for the decades to come. Also, another question which is very important to address at this point is how our policies might be targeted towards including the groups which so far have been vulnerable even before the crisis. For example, indeed children or disabled people, or also cross-border workers, which are now finding themselves in a particularly difficult situation with the restriction of movement. So I think maybe Dragos can say a couple of words on that.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things happening at the same time, and what is important to understand, that while we are right now having as a topic social policy, the reality is that it's not only about social policy, it's basically the interconnectedness about all the other policies that more or less are defining our social life. I mean, I'm a strong advocate against silo policy, and I've mentioned that in terms of coordination and the underpinnings of different other policies. But I do believe, for instance, that I mean, our approach as liberals is that with a strong and healthy economy and with a functional, internal market, that's our best liberal recipe for having better jobs, more opportunities, and so on. So I mean, I would certainly say that right now, what we are defining as the social agenda is actually the result of an array of policies, and we are talking right now, for instance, about the two big transformation, the digital and green. And although you will not find the word social in it, I mean, basically the green transformation is about creating a lot of jobs and opportunities and redefining the way we live the daily life in terms of the care that we're having for resources. Whereas digital, I mean, I've made the point earlier that it's about the digital divide. It's about using technologies of digital for more inclusive and so on and so forth. So I don't know if I'm answering directly your question, but I'm just trying to say that social is not just something that DG Employment deals with, or per se in Italy or another member state Minister of Labor and Social Affairs deals with it. We are talking about an integrated view on how all the policies that we are actually putting forward are creating a perspective, a vision. And I would dare to say that if we as liberals are supposed to carry the flag forward on this particular topic, we should be able to project a vision about the daily life of an ordinary citizen based on the mix of policies that we are putting forward, highlighting on one hand our core values, that is individual liberty, right to choose, access, opportunity, but on the other hand explaining that, for instance, because we are talking right now about the European Union involvement, explaining what Europe is actually doing in order to create the right type of predictability and limit the uncertainties that can actually be tapped by extremists. And I think that, I mean, I'm sure that Giorgio will come up with the more economic, fundamentals for that, but I just wanted to highlight again the broader principles.
Thank you, Dragos, and for sure we will come back to the question of the importance of addressing the immediate needs of citizens to show that Europe is there for them, and the strategic importance of this moment to show European added value. This is one of the questions we will for sure address in a couple of minutes. But first, I would like to give the floor to Giorgio if he would like to comment on what Dragos has said.
Yes, we think we can stress what we already written in the position paper. So what we basically think is that in this moment, there are not in all regions of Europe the conditions to apply strictly the principle of conditionality. That's the problem. That happens in some, not only in Eastern Europe, but also in some regions of Southern Italy, where figures and data about labor market show us that there is not actually a labor market where you can find opportunities and where you can grab opportunities and so apply the idea of conditionality. So this is the recall to reality that we have already very clearly stated also in the document. Besides, as you remember before, and there are some categories that seems to be more exposed to the consequences of the crisis, and the youngsters, women, and so on. But these are the categories that have already been exposed in the past. So this is probably showing to us some problems that are previous and independent from the pandemic crisis, that poses, in my opinion, another challenge and questions for liberals on social policy. In any case, I totally agree. As I said before, probably the answer to this problem, to these structural problems, is to try to think an integrated strategy where regional development strategies are integrated with social intervention. So in that case, you can find, I would say, a new interpretation of the principle of conditionality, because at the same time you are also offering a place where conditionality can be actually applied.
Thank you, Giorgio. And indeed, you mentioned another very important aspect, which I think where European social policy as such might be particularly useful is in terms of addressing regional disparities, because this is maybe something which cannot be fully addressed on the national level, but European social policy might address this, the diversity and the complexity of keeping the same standards across the EU. And if you would like to elaborate a bit more on that. On the importance of the regional.
To me, Maria, or to
yeah,
Giorgio. To me.
Please.
Yeah. I mean, again, I realize right now that I didn't cover the issue of conditionality well enough for the last question. So again, I've been actually studying in another life, this whole thing with the Bretton Woods concept and conditionality and development and so on and so forth. So what I can tell you is that I think that right now what we understand by conditionality is a little bit different from what we understood by conditionality on, for instance, IMF frameworks, Bretton Woods, post-Bretton Woods, and so on and so forth. I believe that right now conditionality should be understood more in terms of providing coherence and coordination, in terms of providing the mix of the incentives, to have both the carrot and the stick, if you want, and not necessarily and restricting based on one particular model of development, what the member states are doing. So I feel, for instance, that we need the European semester. We need, the recommendation to follow, for instance, at European level, how we move forward. And I also believe that, and that's a normal thing for liberals, that we need some sort of responsibility and fiscal and financial responsibility in terms of managing public money and so on and so forth. So that goes without saying. On the other hand, I do believe that right now, because you mentioned territorial disparities and regional disparities, I do believe that one size fits all policies are not necessarily the best possible thing. And what we need is the kind of flexibility and a toolkit, a menu that should actually be available for the different member states to pick and choose the right thing for them. For instance, just to give you a particular example, the whole concept of social expenditure and the idea that social expenditure, especially recurrent social expenditure, it's something intrinsically bad that needs to be controlled and so on. It's in my view a little bit obsolete. I mean, the new concept should be, a package of social investment, with a bundle of brick and mortar investment and, social services or care services that go hand in hand. So the whole thing in dividing, for instance, ERDF money from ESF money, and trying to have different strands, infrastructure separately and services separately, I think that it's no longer the case. And there are, especially if we go with this new paradigm that I'm suggesting, for instance, the care sector towards the elderly or, vulnerable categories, people with disability or children and youth, I mean, that's an investment that needs to be put forward as you put business investment, where you have both infrastructure and people and wages and so on and so forth. So I would actually go a little bit beyond the regular stuff where you say you need to limit social recurrent expenditure, you need to limit things that are not investment and so on and so forth. I mean, it's also how you define investment, and if you include social investment as being investment in this new picture that I'm putting forward. So that would be, my take or my contribution to the ideas that have been, discussed in the last couple of minutes.
Thank you so much, Dragos. Yeah, it's actually two levels of conditionality. The one is on the level of how the EU coordinates the member states. Another level of conditionality is also how the social policy incentivizes citizens to take the best advantage of social support if they need it, but also to come back to the market as soon as possible. So, like, it's interesting that we covered two different aspects of this concept, and I would like to give the floor to Giorgio, if you would like to comment on what Dragos has just said. Giorgio, you're muted.
No, maybe a question also. It would be interesting to understand from the perspective of a member of parliament, there is actually the opportunity in the future to see a more actual integration between European funds, because this is another long-standing issue in the debate about the use of European resources, that in fact, when we come to the local application, does not seem to always work properly. So it could be interesting to understand if from the perspective of the parliament, we can see in the future a more structural and also maybe mandatory integration between structural funds.
Dragos?
Yeah, I think the connection actually broke for just a second. So, Giorgio, if you can repeat the last part of the sentence.
The question is from your perspective, we can see in the future a change of strategy in the integration of European funds, because the principle of integration has been repeatedly stated, but then the practical use at the local level, in particular the regional level, not always this principle seems to be applied.
Exactly. That's the line, Giorgio, and thank you for raising it. So if you follow the multi-annual financial frameworks, the principle of multi-funds investment have actually been brought, and gain traction recently. But when it comes to to overseeing the expenditure, it's actually much more simpler than to put it in in boxes and say infrastructure is infrastructure and then other things are separately. I would say that we need this type of redesign in terms of how we perceive this type of support. I think that we are on the right track in terms of the debate. For instance, for the RRF debate, for Recovery and Resilience Facility, this discussion was not there, trying to separate types of funding and so on. We had this broad term of investment and reforms that was there. But I mean, reforms, for instance, it's a soft issue, and investment, it's a hard issue. So we already have bundled together things in this unprecedented exercise of solidarity and financing. So I think that if the RRF would actually prove to be having the right impact that we are actually counting on, we might use this model to redefine some of the MFF rules for the future with this type of integrated approach. Now, the RRF, we don't know yet if it's going to be a success or not. That's what I'm going to be working on in the European Parliament, in the working group for monitoring the RRF implementation. But certainly one important thing would be this integrated view that the pillars are interconnected and they are actually having a EU value added effect, that it's not just from an accountant perspective easier to follow, but from the impact that we are actually seeking more relevant. So yes, I mean, in short, the answer would be yes, indeed, I believe that we need a redesign for the maybe next financial perspective.
Thank you, Dragos. And then in this regard, I think actually we have time for very brief response to just one question more, but I think following from what you've been discussing in the last couple of minutes, both of you, I would like to ask you, do you think that the current EU institutional framework is sufficient for that, or we might need to consider the changes to the treaties to implement all the all the perspectives which need to be implemented to provide forward, future-oriented social policy at the European level? Dragos, please.
Yeah, we, Renew Europe, have actually suggested a conference on the future of Europe. It started from us, from Guy Verhofstadt and all the other colleagues that we've been quite active in promoting that. And one of the core principles that we've been fighting for and obtain is that this process should be a process where citizens need to be involved. And when I'm saying that citizens need to be involved, they should be at the core of this particular debate that we are having on the future of Europe. Now, we have our preconceived ideas about, changing a little bit of unanimity, having a different setup in terms of democratizing the institutions and so on and so forth. And we are willing to create the debates on that. But to say from the beginning that we need to change the treaties, that would mean that we want to impose our ideas on the citizens. So we cannot be at the same time relying on a citizen-led debate and at the same time, having this preconception that we need to change that, and that. So that would be my answer. As liberals, we would actually love to see what the citizens, the people are having in mind, their views, and then to regulate if there is a case to regulate. So that's our approach on that. Obviously, we are willing, just to clarify, we are willing to go up to treaty revision if there will be a clear view, a documented view, evidence-based view that we need these type of changes in order to have a better union for the people.
Thank you. Georgia, would you like?
Well, from my point of view, the institutional framework is not actually my field of study, but I may say that probably in this moment time matters. And I'm not sure that a reform of the treaty would be the answer, because it would require too much time to get the results. So probably it would be better to work on the existing tools and to make them work better. And I agree with what Dragos was saying before about the different meanings of the conditionality. But in fact, in the working group and today, we spoke about conditionality from a social, actually labor policy point of view, but there are many different kind of conditionality. But I can see at the end of our discussion that probably we could talk also about conditionality between different funds at the European level, so that probably we could imagine some form of conditionality in the actual practical regional application of the actual use of European funds, sort of previewing a mandatory conditionality between different funds. I say this because I know well the regional framework, as you may understand, because even if I'm representing the Centro Einaudi, my full-time activity is at the regional level in Piedmont and Italy. So I can bring you my experience from the regional level, saying that probably imagining a form of conditionality between different funds could be a very interesting solution in the short and medium term. The reform of the treaty would be too long to get to the result.
Thank you, Georgia. Unfortunately, we're running almost out of time, so I would like to draw up some conclusions from the discussion. I thank you very much to both of our distinguished speakers for sharing your views, from sharing your very different perspectives, different in terms of expertise, but yet so consistent in terms of a general approach and in terms of defining the priorities. And another thing which we unfortunately don't have time to discuss further, but which Dragos has mentioned, is the importance of developing social policy, European social policy, but also for the liberals to participate in this process, is because it's our opportunity, liberals' opportunity to address the non-liberal discourses, non-liberal narratives which are currently raising across Europe, unfortunately, and which are directly resulting from citizens feeling uncertain, feeling insecure, feeling unsure about their future. And that is another that's why I think we have discussed two main incentives for these debates in general. One is like to address the immediate concerns, also long-term concerns for citizens, but also to address the alternative discourses which we would like to limit to a certain extent, and suggest our alternative, how we see Europe and how we see social and liberal Europe of the future. And on this, unfortunately, we'll have to close the debate. I thank you very much once again for your very passionate remarks. I think it really shed light on many aspects, on many details of this long and broad topic. And yeah, looking forward to the social summit in Porto. Hopefully will bring significant results and improvements. And also to wrap up the discussion, I would like to thank all the attendees, all the participants, and to ask you to stay tuned for the next on the agenda webinar, which will happen on the 6th of May. And it will address a very exciting topic of the conference on the future of Europe. So hope to see you there, and wish you a very nice rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the interesting discussion. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.